So Good. Yep. Great. Okay, welcome everybody to Vertical Slice of 2018 at FIEA. We're Team Bees. This is Andrew Simpson. He's our lead designer. And my name's Nate Randall. I'll be speaking on behalf of the team. So our game is Hypervital. And I'm going to jump right into a recap of some of the story stuff to get everyone who wasn't here last time acquainted. So Hypervital stars Captain Kate Sotera aboard the space station Persephone. The space station Persephone is currently orbiting Saturn on a mission, and it has been invaded by an alien plant monster that you can see over here called the Xenoflora, which is slowly growing throughout the ship and threatens to kill Kate, along with destroying the entire station. Kate needs to survive 9 months until rescue comes, but in order to make it that long, she needs to go into cryosleep for long periods of time to preserve her resources. So in order to introduce you guys to the backstory of this game, I'm going to dive into the reactor room, one of the first rooms that Kate sees after awaking from cryosleep. So when Kate arrives at the reactor room, being called there on a distress call from the ship's systems, she immediately sees that the reactor's been overgrown by this alien plant. And then she looks down to see the body of her lover, Paul, dead by the console, having sealed the room shut to prevent it from getting around the station. She also sees that the crate that had been containing the seed, which turned out to be a monster, is busted open and that it has apparently escaped. She looks down toward the console across the room and walks down there to see bodies of her crewmates now being overgrown with plant growth, using them as fuel to continue to grow. So at this point, she knows that she has a lot to do in order to survive the 9 months it would take to rescue. So she turns tail and flees in order to figure out how to survive. The first thing that she does at that point is try to figure out how to get enough food to stay awake and actively combat the Xenoflora, even though she has to spend a lot of her time in cryosleep. So she goes over to the biodome, a space on the ship specifically designed to grow new food in a sustainable way. And she sets up her crops to start growing. But she knows that she's about to have a problem. The Xenoflora is going to keep growing. It's eventually going to reach the biodome. And at that point, she has no idea what damage it might cause. So she has to find some way to protect the biodome against the Xenoflora as it makes its way across the ship. So what she decides to do is lay a trap. But it can't just be any trap. If she were to just have an explosion trap, then she risks damaging all of the crops that she's trying to have for herself, along with the Xenoflora monster. So she needs to be a little bit more crafty than that. What she's decided to do is put a puddle, get a puddle of water right by the door at the entrance to the biodome, and electrify that puddle. So eventually, when the monster makes its way there, beats down the door, and steps onto the puddle, it becomes electrified and stunned. Right? So the monster's now stunned in a puddle in pain, and eventually that puddle will evaporate. Once it does, the monster no longer wants to be there. It's experienced great pain from the electricity and turns tail and flees, leaving at least some time for the crops to go undamaged by the plant monster as it tries to find another way to infiltrate the room. We've discovered that complex interactions like this are possible with a very small number of complex interlocking systems, of which I have mapped right here in rough form. So we identified 4 systems that we're building for our game. We have heat, electricity, water, and gas, and they manifest both in room properties and also in the objects in the room themselves, which all interact with each other. So first, I'd like to go over the room properties. The first one that we have 3, is power. Power provides electricity to a room, and there's only a limited amount of power that can be used on the station since the reactor's been damaged, so you have to use this resource carefully. We also have temperature. Changing temperature is going to have a variety of effects, some of them positive and some of them negative based on context. So heating a room makes fires more likely to start and evaporates water. And then cooling a room would freeze objects covered in water, but also really threatens Kate, who can't survive in those sorts of cold conditions. And then we have air composition, which is the rough amount of O2 in the air. So hyper-O2, if there's too much of it in the air, makes fires explosive, which is incredibly dangerous, but also suffocates plants that need a lesser O2 content to survive. And then hypo-O2 conditions would snuff out fires, promote plant growth as opposed to the converse, and then suffocate Kate instead, who really can't survive in that environment for very long. And then you interact with those room properties as a player through our wiring system. So the room conditions power conduits, which they only turn on under specific conditions. So a couple examples of that might be you could have a heater that's wired to hyper-O2 sensors. So only when the room is super oxygenated does this conduit turn on and provide power. And then you access that power by using a jury-rigged wiring tool, something that all of the people on board the station have access to that allows you to make quick circuits on the fly to fix problems as they inevitably arise in the deep of space. And then also, we want to talk about our objects a little bit. So you can see this initially very confusing looking state diagram, which I will talk through. So every object has a set of states. We have 7 that we've mapped out that are interlocked together. So those are the individual nodes up there. And then the arrows indicate transitions that are deterministic between those different states. So just to give an example, let's say you have a wet object, and then you cool the room down. So it would move to then the frozen state. It would become frozen. And if you heat it up again, then it would go back to being wet. The water would melt, or the ice would melt. Another example of something up there would be goopy. So goop is the substance that the xenoflora excretes as it moves about the station. And it has a couple kind of surprising weird qualities. If something's covered in goop, it becomes flammable, but it's also incredibly insulated. So it doesn't, things that are coated in goop don't change temperature very easily. And they also insulate against electricity. And as you guys can probably remember from our January update, we planned to have 26 states. Clearly, to get this level of interconnectivity with 26 would have been impossible. So one of the first things we did at the start of February was consolidate down to a smaller number of states that were deeply interconnected and could lead to emergent behavior to solve problems on board the station. One more thing I want to talk about in regard to this is that we have different tags for objects. Tags will correspond to various starting conditions for an item. So for example, a metallic object would be conductive but not flammable. So you could electrify it but not light fire to it. And a fabric object would be not conductive but flammable. So have a different set of properties and behaviors there. But we didn't want to just declare that in theory this was emergent and move on from there. We actually wanted to start testing it, so we built a paper prototype for which you can see our first one right here. And the basic situation here is you have one room with a set of current room properties and a variety of objects to interact with in the room. And then you have a condition that you're trying to meet in order to survive. So in this case, you're trying to get out of the room before the xenoflora monster arrives and kills you on the spot. So we used turns to map this out in terms of time. That was just an abstraction for the purpose of paper prototyping. The game itself will not actually be turn-based. So we had 3 goals with this paper prototyping. The first was we really wanted to see what was fun. We discovered really quickly that it was. The second one was we wanted to see if we missed any systems that we should build, or if we could consolidate down onto like one set of a core system as opposed to have a wide variety of them. An example of something like this that we found was our wiring system. Initially, we planned on it happening through UI magic. So you'd go access a terminal and magically wire a refrigerator to a particular power conduit, and that would just happen, but not very visible. We found that it worked better to use the system we already had of placing objects in space to craft wiring systems on the fly, wandering about the room. But that was much more engaging and made use of things that we had already built anyways. And then the last one was the test for emergence. So initially I had mapped out 5 solutions to this particular problem. And by the end of play testing, we found that there were at least 10, and only one of them required a small change to our design. Our next prototype was to look at systemic interactions between rooms. So here we have each piece of paper is an individual room, which has its own set of current properties and its own set of power conduits, and then a variety of objects in each room. And what we wanted to try to test for here was whether we could create complex Rube Goldberg-esque cascading interactions throughout these rooms. And we started to do some of that work. You'll see more results of this toward April, but we do have a couple initial results in our paper prototype, in our actual Unreal prototype, which I'd like to bring up now. So the first thing I'd like to do, we have a couple individual rooms to talk about specific mechanical interactions, and then we'll move on from there. So this first room is to look at the powering system or the electricity systems in the room. So you can see right at the top, we have some UI to show you the current properties of the room. You can see the temperature is lukewarm, the air level is neutral. So if Andrew turns to his left, you'll see that the air neutral power conduit is currently powered on because that's the condition of the room. So we can attach a wire there via our wiring tool. And he can run it all the way across the room and attach it to this mechanical object over there in the corner, which is a smoke machine. You can see when he turns it on, some smoke starts to come out the top because it's been electrified. But that's a little too simple. Let's get a little more complicated here. So if you could delete that wire, Andrew. And what we're going to do is instead attach the wire to this, this piece of metal that's sitting in the middle of the floor. And you remember that metal is conductive. So this is going to become electrified when it's attached to the wire. And we're going to use that as a power splitter to attach to two different smoke machines here. And you'll see that when we do that, once Andrew's placed all the nodes, you'll see that both of them have turned on. But again, that's too simple for us. We wanted to get more deep, complex interactions here. So we're going to interact with our with the wet system. So we have puddles that we can currently place down on the floor. So water is conductive. So when you put down those puddles, they become electrified. And then we can use that as a starting point to wire to our third smoke machine, thus turning it on. So now we've done all three. One thing to note is that these are just proxy particle effects. That's not what the final game will look like. That's just for programming purposes. So also, if Kate steps in the puddles, you'll see that she too becomes electrified. We're in God mode right now, so that doesn't kill her outright, but we are tracking that state. And the last thing that I'd like to show you real quick is our goop interaction. So you remember that goop isn't conductive. So if we throw some goop on that piece of metal there, it's going to cut off that circuit and turn off all three of those machines. Great. So let's look at the next room then. So this room is to look at some of our temperature systems. I'm just going to walk you through some of the objects in this room, first of all. So this is an O2 canister, a canister full of oxygen. We have a freezer. We have a variety of sensors on the wall. We got a puddle in the corner here. We have an O2 condenser to pull oxygen out of the air. We got a burner. We got a heater and some plants, some more sensors, and some goop in the corner. So the first thing that we're going to want to do here is try cooling down the room. So we're going to wire one of the power conduits that's currently turned on to the freezer. At which point you'll see at the top that the temperature is going to start to decrease, which is then going to decrease the temperature of all the objects in the room. Notably, that includes these puddles in the corner and Kate, who is currently wet, at which point they'll both freeze when they hit super cold, right? Which is going to then slow down Kate's movement as well. Cool. So now that we've taken a look at cooling down the room, let's take a look at heating things up. So we have a heater here. Let's place it next to the plants and see if we can catch fire with them. So we're going to turn on that heater. And the heater will warm up over time and eventually also heat up the plants that are right next to it to cause them to catch fire, which we can see happening. So you can see the plants are now on fire, right? And if Kate goes and steps in the plants, she will now become, the ice will melt, and eventually she will catch fire as well, which is always a good time. So the last thing that we like to show in this room is another property of the goop. So you'll see, you'll see in the corner behind Andrew, there's a goop puddle. So if we put a piece of ice in the goop, since goop insulates against temperature, even though this room is hot, that ice is going to stay frozen. Whereas if we leave one out there, then the ice will gain temperature, eventually melt. And now we're going to make use of our time dilation mechanic, the thing that's so important for going into cryosleep and having this world still act while you're asleep, to just go ahead and speed up time and watch that puddle evaporate. So you can see it's slowly decreasing in size as the water evaporates. Great. Let's check out the next room. Oh, Cool. So this is the room to check out our air, the properties of air. So we have a CO2 condenser and an O2 condenser to change the relative level of O2 in the room. We have a heater over there in the corner. And was there anything? That's what's in this room. So the first thing that we want to show is just these plants catching fire. So if we wire the air neutral, let's see, the air is currently carbonated because you were on fire.
Also forgive us, we got emergence.
We reached full emergence. So what we were trying to show right here is that if we turn on this heater here, it's going to heat up the plants. Oh, okay, look, we reset. That works. All right. So we're going to wire this air neutral sensor to the heater here, which is going to heat up the plants. Once they heat up, then those plants will catch fire. But of course, fire uses O2 to burn. So as they're on fire, the air level will eventually change after all the oxygen has come out of the room, and then the fire will snuff out. Now, good. So what we're going to do now, so that now now there's no oxygen in the room, but we like to get some oxygen back. So we're going to use the condenser here to get some oxygen back in the air. But you'll see, Andrew actually wired it over to the left to a particular sensor, which is no longer on. So he's going to have to use the air neutral sensor now in order to get it all the way to hyperoxygenated. And he's going to do that by doing that same puddle idea that we used before. Now making a switch, basically, this circuit is now on whenever either of those room conditions are true. So now the air level is going to become super oxygenated, and we're going to do some disastrous things with fire. So we're going to wire the last remaining on power conduit over to the left. We're going to wire that right to the heater, which is going to eventually set those plants that you see on fire, which is going to make things blow up. Cool. So now that we've demonstrated some of the basic interactions of the game, we'd like to move on to a case of how this might turn into longer-term gameplay connecting with player goals. So right now, Kate is in a room, and a couple rooms down is a computer console that she needs to access in order to contact rescue. So she needs to get to that console, make sure it's in condition to use, and then actually use it successfully. So first thing she does is take stock of her surroundings. So she sees an O2 condenser, and she also sees a power conduit for the on state, or for the hot state. So doesn't seem to be too much to do in this room. There is a vent though, so that vent connects to another room, connects air between the two rooms, and so could potentially change those room properties. For now, let's go on to the next room. All right, so in this room, Kate sees that there's an air neutral sensor, so a power conduit that she can actually use, and then the connecting vent there. There's also a heater here. But then also, the other thing she sees is the obstacle. So this is a rusted door. The plant causes things to rust as it moves around the ship, and so it's now blocked shut. She has to either blow it up or freeze it and then break it in order to get through. So in order to do that, she's going to try to make a canister of O2 and then blow it up. To that end, she's going to wire a connection here to the heater. The heater is going to gradually heat up this room. Also, this door is just an abstraction right now. It's supposed to be a hallway that doesn't actually transmit air. That's why the vent needs to be open. Once that room is hot, she's going to open this vent and then watch very carefully to close it right when the temperature hits hot. We don't want it to be super hot or else that sensor will turn off. Then she wires that power conduit to the O2 condenser, and eventually a O2 canister that looks suspiciously like a bomb will appear, and Kate will grab it. But now there's a tricky moment here, because as she's running across this space, the room that she was in is now super hot, so she might just catch flame all of a sudden if she spends too long in here. But fortunately, the goop is insulating, so she's going to run right across and cover herself in goop in order not to just spontaneously combust. And then she's going to use that same thing to make a time bomb here. So she's going to put down the bomb and then use a cube of ice in order to make a remote explosion. So she puts down the ice here, and what the ice is going to do is melt almost immediately because the room is super hot and create a puddle. This will wash off the goop from the bomb, and once that goop is washed off, now this bomb, once it's not wet, will eventually become hot enough that will explode. So Kate's going to stay way back, watch for that water to evaporate enough that the bomb can finally become super hot, and then it blows up along with the door. Great, so we finally made it to the room with the console in it. So you can see that the console has been overgrown with plants. Even though it has a cool texture on it that looks like it's on, it's actually not working because it's covered in plants. So we have to find some way to get them off without damaging the computer. The computer will be destroyed if it encounters too much heat, but it's fairly resistant to water since most of the electronics on this station are. So the first thing that Kate's going to do, just so that the computer doesn't get destroyed by some crazy fire that we might start, who knows, is goop the computer. That way it's insulated against temperature. And now what her goal is going to be here, and I'll describe this in theory, and then Andrew will act on it, is we want to set all those plants on fire, which will then turn on the sprinkler system and also take all the oxygen out of the air. So they'll no longer be on fire and water will come down. And then we want to freeze that water so that we can just smash the plants to bits. So the first step in that is going to be wiring the Hypo O2 sensor to the freezer. So now if we change the room conditions in here, that will turn on. So we bring up the temperature in this room by connecting it to the room that's super hot next door. The temperature will increase, hit super hot, and then we see a lot of things happen relatively quickly here. They catch fire, sprinkler goes off, oxygen goes out, they're watery, the room temperature is going down. Hits super cold, then the plants themselves will freeze, and then Andrew will go smash them with a hammer. Take them off of the console, most importantly, and there now Kate can finally contact rescue and hopefully get off this forsaken space station. So that's the main part of the gameplay demo. We have one more to show you, which is a brief demonstration of our AI and what it's capable of. So our AI, if you go to God mode, you can see the AI in the corner there. It operates on a system of needs and wants. Since it's in a very small space with nothing in it, it doesn't really need or want anything, so it's just kind of idling around. But if Kate were to walk onto one of its plants, or disappear into the void, if Kate were to walk onto one of these plants, the monster will immediately know what plant she stepped on, and then move that way to come and kill her. And then it doesn't know where she is yet. It just knows that she was there. So it kind of looks around for her a little bit, and then if Kate ever gets in its line of sight, the monster will chase her down and kill her. And there you go. It gets kind of stuck on corners. All right, that's good. Great. So now I want to talk a bit about our March milestone. Since I mentioned that we now have a visual target and a gameplay target, we'd like to spend the month of March focused on combining those two together. And we are accounting for the fact that we have GDC and spring break in this, so we're accounting for that and the fact that people won't really be working at full capacity during this period of time. That's part of our planning. So we want to have two rooms at visual and gameplay target. And we also want to have Kate moving an engine. Now that last thing is probably surprising because really we should have had Kate moving an engine by now, but we've hit some animation problems, so I'm going to talk through that a little bit. First off, I do want to mention that we do have a model for Captain Kate. Here she is up on screen. This is finalized in engine. I'll be showing that toward the end of the presentation. But it turns out the main thing that we've learned is that mocap is hard. We made some assumptions about how it was going to work that ended up being kind of wrong and have really made our pipeline take longer than we think. We do have it rigged. That's what we're showing over there on your right. That we have a rig for Kate that's set up, but the process of getting our mocap animations onto that rig has been slower and a little bit messed up. That's the first thing we'll be tackling in March to make sure we have that pipeline ready to go and that we have Kate moving toward the end of March. So this is going to be our first gameplay room. This is the biology laboratory. It's currently just past white box stage. We're starting to put in some assets into it. So you'll see this in a finalized state at the end of March when we come back here. And part of how we're building levels is by making use of a material tag system. So what we do, we can have any particular object, be it a table, a bucket, whatever. We attach a material to it, and it gives it that tag and thus those properties. So if you put a metallic tag on something, then it can be conductive. If you put a wooden tag on something, then it would instead be flammable and not conductive. Another tool we have for our level builders that you saw in our visual target was this dynamic piping system. So we can change the shape, the rough number of rivets in it, as well as the girth of these pipes dynamically as we need for our level construction. We also promised back in January to have plant propagation figured out. I'm happy to say that we do. And not only does it grow, but it grows over different sorts of surfaces. And you can watch it climb around. It behaves algorithmically, and we have to tune it so that it's at the right speed for gameplay, but the propagation is there. Another thing that you saw in the AI demo was responsive plants. We knew that we wanted the monster to know where you had been based on if you stepped on its plants and come chase after you. So we have visually responsive plants that glow and wiggle in hopefully an ominous way when you walk over them, and then the monster can come track you down and kill you. So we also encountered a couple art challenges that we knew about walking into, but have been even deeper and more challenging than we would have initially thought. One of those was conveyance. So you remember that we have two particular states. We have wet and we have frozen. So we have a material that we can throw on any object in our game to convey that something is frozen or convey that something's wet. Another example of something that we have is we have steam and smoke that collects at the top of the room. This is really important for that sprinkler system that I mentioned, so that you can visually tell when smoke has started to collect and the sprinkler system is likely to kick off. This is the one we're using for steam. We're hoping to retouch that one to use for smoke as well. We also wanted to convey the room properties themselves visually. So you can see on your left there, we have a heat one that needs to be a little bit less wiggly, but is conveying when the room is very hot. And we have a cold one over on the right here. The other really big challenge that Tom, of course, correctly identified last update is user interface. So we wanted to move toward a symbolic one as opposed to the text-based proxy one that we're using right now. So we have several of those icons that we've put together. We've got flame and electricity and temperature. And we've discovered that there's a certain amount of testing that's necessary for this. We're planning to build our first iteration of it by the end of April and be testing it every month and rebuilding it to be really clear in both May and June as well. Sorry, that got cut off a little bit. But we have assets we made versus asset packs. Even though our team consists mainly of technical artists, and those are the problems we're particularly interested in challenging, they also did turn out a whole bunch of assets that we've been using. So I have those listed out for you on the left versus the ones that from asset packs on the right. And we plan to use those asset packs, like everything from the asset pack you see there, in the final build. We're not replacing any of those things. So, all right, that's good. So for focus group testing, this was another challenge we knew we'd have making an emergent game. That just declaring it's fun isn't good enough. You really have to put it up in front of people and try it out and see what's good. So we put together a plan for ourselves to do focus group testing. We spend the first week doing preparation and planning, so getting a build together and making sure we know what questions we're trying to answer with the focus group. We actually run the focus group. Then we'd collect the data, try to find the trends, design to answer those, and implement it. It's all about a 3 to 3.5 week process. And given that timetable and the fact that we're integrating by the end of March, our plan is to have a focus group test in the middle of April, the middle of May, and the middle of June. This is our schedule through all of release. I'm not going to try to go into the weeds here. I'm perfectly happy to bring this back up, and I have a but on a rough sense, April is really a production month where we're going to turn out more rooms and refine our gameplay. May, we're trying to get to a full playthrough of the game being possible, even if it's just white boxed through portions. June, we want to lock down all our mechanics, and then for July, we really want to work on getting to 0 bugs by the end of that. And now, we had promised you 1 room at the end of February, but in fact, we decided that wasn't enough, so we made 2. So this is the medical bay right here. This is the first space that Kate sees upon awaking from cryosleep at the start of the game. And here she sees a trail of breadcrumbs that lead her to remember what happened back then. Kate had been injured by the xenoflora itself and carried here by Paul, who rested her down on the gurney, collected all the supplies that he could, and went back to go try to fight the xenoflora and rescue as many people aboard the station as he could. But right before he did that, he discovered that Kate's condition really was not good. She was in danger of dying. So he scooped her up and then walked down the hallway you see to the right. And once he reached the end of the hallway, he laid her down in her cryo casket, sealed the lid, and let her sleep frozen until she awoke to the horror that is the present day. We also wanted to show, we did promise that we'd show Kate in engine, even though she's not moving, before the end of this presentation. So we just want to show her in context, in her environment here, in her silly, very still A pose. We like the connection between her and the cryobed in terms of the glowing lights. And after that incredibly ridiculous amount of talking I've just done, thank you, we're Team Bees. All right, are there any questions?
All right. Well, good afternoon, gentlemen. Okay, so there's a lot of work here. I feel like the team has been doing a lot of stuff. And yeah, you needed to, given the scope that you were playing around with this uber emergent game. So I'm glad to see that the team is, applying the elbow grease when necessary. So the first scene, I thought it was a good opening number with regards to putting us in your world early on. But you also gave a little prelude there about reminding the story. I thought that was all good. I like the staging of that sacrificial coworker who helped out to lock it off in that room and the crate. I don't think the player would know that and think that. And so your narration is, in a way, that may or may not be cheating depending on what you want to do here. If you're expecting the player to know that the monster came out of that crate that's sitting right there, not enough was done to do that. So just to keep that in mind, that your perception of this, oh, of course, that's the monster came out, obviously. Not obviously, right? So make sure that if you want the player to think that, you are making sure that we think that, and then you don't have to tell us. That we are telling you, like, oh, I think that crate was where the monster came out. You're like, yes, we succeeded. So that's also conveyance, a more literal conveyance of story. So be careful about what you assume we know versus what we don't. You spent a lot of time early on telling us what Kate is going to be doing. She decides to go to the biosphere to get some food and all this other thing, all this other stuff. But then I kept feeling like you told us that the game was giving the player the power to do whatever they want. So why is the player going to choose to go to the biosphere to get food now versus doing whatever else they want? How are you making sure that the player does that? Or are you saying this is just narratively defined and it's going to be a cinematic, right?
That's part of the conveyance that we're talking about. One thing that we want to be really clear on early on in the game is that not securing enough food is dangerous for Kate. And so a player might think of that as an option for one of the things that they could do. With then other rooms set up for other important things that she has to accomplish. So you kind of you have to make a trade-off to a degree. Do you forego as much food and force yourself to stay in cryo for longer in order to accomplish some other task, or do you get that food but forsake that other thing that you needed to do?
Great, but how does the player know that that's the fork in the road they're at? That's the choice they make.
That's the hard conveyance task. We'll have a good answer for you. That's our goal for the end of April, is to get to the place where we can do that sort of conveyance to the player.
Yeah. So I'm not saying.
I think it's a hard task. Yeah.
Wrong. I'm reminding you that.
I appreciate it. It's a hard task.
You need to remember to equip the player with the ability to make that intelligent choice, rather than, well, I haphazardly went left and didn't realize that I wasn't going to the biosphere, and now I've inadvertently chosen to not have enough food. I want to know, like, this is what I'm up for, and so then I choose. So that's about player agency, which I think is imperative for your game, that players have the intention of their choices rather than it being haphazard. So that's just something to be really careful about. Really good job in simplifying down to core states. You scared me and you said there were going to be 7,000. There are now an achievable amount of them. I think that's good. And I figured that this day would come, and I'm glad it has come now versus you thinking you can do 7,000 and you can't. So good job in de-scoping that way. The wiring continues to be challenging for me. One is that it's an odd bird in this futuristic space station world where we're having to run these physical cables all over the place. I mean, I don't even have to do that in my house now in 2018, so I imagine in the future they would have gotten even better about power sources and all this jazz. So there's an oddness to that, and the power sources themselves being so randomly contextual, like, oh, this power source turns on when there's a lot of O2, and this one when there's a little. It's just confusing that the future is like that, and so I continue to encourage you to find a way to maybe justify that, or find another way to do it, because I think it's a lot for the player to kind of swallow. And I really admit and see that those artifices are there to serve the emergent gameplay mechanics that you have. I get it, right? And I support those emergent mechanics. So I support these ideas. I'm just encouraging you to continue to fight the good fight of trying to find ways to justify them or make them make as much sense as possible to the player, so that we don't have this hurl of just being confused of why these things exist in a future that's kind of unusual. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's tough. I get that. That's a really big design challenge. I get it. I love the paper prototypes. I loved playing your paper prototype. I thought it was awesome, and I had fun doing it. And I was even more impressed when I saw that you had the little paper rooms and how they were going to connect with each other. I'm like, oh yes, that's exactly how you would propagate these powers across rooms. So I'm mucho proud of you for playing around with that. The splitting of power seems like that might be maybe unnecessary and less powerful than some of the other stuff that you've been talking about, and it feels like it's starting to steer you into a heavily wiring, such that that's now your core mechanic, is it's all about wiring stuff, which I think is challenging. I think the pylons solve some of that, and then they give you more discrete nodes to play with, but the pylons are kind of confusing to justify their existence, so I don't know if you want wiring to be your core mechanic at the end of the day. So continue to play around with other things to center on. When you spent time to evaporate the puddle, you were on fire, but you didn't die. So it's like the world's slowest burning fire. Or were you gooped up or something?
So that's Kate in God mode right now. One of the things we're doing for the end of March is to actually have her die in response to things.
Fair enough. No problem. I do think you need a gradient or a progress bar for the variables that change over time. There was a moment when you were waiting, I think for the O2 or the temperature to change, and you were like, wait. Oh, there it was. And so as a player, it's like, if I'm trying to change the O2 over time, I need to know, is this going to take 5 minutes? Because this guy's banging at the door about to kill me, or is this going to take a minute? So there are probably things that need a discrete bar or discrete value. And I know you're trying to avoid that, because you're trying to reduce complexity by not throwing a bunch of numbers in our face. So I'm totally on your side in that way. But maybe progress bars or little timer dials or something helps us to know how fast things are changing. Do we need to light more plants on fire to cause more heat to suck more O2? Or is this going to be fast enough because that guy's about to break through the door? Things like that I think will probably come up. At the end of the day, I think that you gave us several good examples of things we could do. But for my money, I might have liked one really simple, clear, great example rather than several good ones. Do you know what I mean? Because in several of them, I started to get lost, right? Where it's like, okay, now this one's with O2. Okay, hold on, and then there's the temperature thing. Oh yeah, that's right. The plants, they have the good thing, and so it was a lot to follow because you gave so many of them. And I recognize your capstone is easily the hardest capstone in the bunch. Maybe the most complex capstone I've ever seen. Right? It's really complicated, and that is to your credit that you've even decided to courageously take on such a beast. But now you have the burden of tutorial. You have the burden in the bridge of getting us all up to speed. And it kind of makes me wish I was just part of your team in these status updates every day, and I just knew your game inside and out. Because then I'd watch this presentation and be like, oh yeah, you turn up the O2, and then you got the temperature, and oh yeah, it's easy. Like, I'm kind of envious of you team members, because I'm sure for you, it made perfect sense. But I'm still catching up, right? So I think that's a problem as you explain your game. It's a problem as you teach the player how to play your game. So just be sensitive to that.
Yeah.
One great example, one simple example may be better than 5 lesser ones, right? To that degree, there were moments where I felt like maybe I needed a chemistry degree to grasp as quickly as I needed to. But there were also cases where you need to tell us what you are and are not modeling in the world clearly as well. So, okay, it's down. All right, you got O2, you got temperature. Like, the player needs to have a really clear framework for what they do and do not need to worry about, so that you can help on ramp us to the game. The AI of the monster. Cool that you were playing with that. I think that the game's going to involve less of that than it will be focused on the room puzzles. I think your core is around those puzzles in the room and getting the different states and state changes to occur. It feels like once that monster's kind of on your tail, you're pretty much dead.
Yes.
It doesn't seem like a lot of the game is spent evading that guy, or make sure you don't step on the plant. If he gets in that door, good luck. So it seems like most of the game is don't let the guy in. Or if he gets in, you better have some electrified puzzle or some burning plants in the way to kill the dude, because you's dead if he gets in there. So I would encourage you to, in the weighting of priorities to perhaps have your programmers a little less focused on AI as they are focused on the emergent connections in the room that happen. That you front load that stuff first, since it seems to be more important to the game. I didn't see any task reports or as many metrics around.
I have an 80% schedule for March. I could pull up on the screen. This is our plan for March.
Well done. Well done. Yes. Did Rick,
I'm so glad you asked, Ron.
Good work. Touche. I tell my teams constantly, like, even if there's not something that maybe you want to cover, be prepared for the question and throw us the slide and some appendix. Great. So then, I can look at that later, or we can talk about that later. But yes, my main goal was making sure that you are doing this kind of task tracking and scheduling at this level of detail, that's not going without being done. So this is proving to me that you're at least moving down that track. Okay. You mentioned the 2 finished rooms, but I'm not sure how many interactions will be in them, and that's maybe a better metric to utilize, because it's not just about rooms for you, it's about how many interactive states are you playing around with. The same thing with Kate. The deliverable for Kate, what was it again? What did you state it as?
So give me more context for your question. The March milestone goal?
Yep.
For Kate specifically, that was more of an art goal to actually get her moving with animations.
Get her moving with animations.
Yeah.
In March.
Yeah.
Well, I can wave her arm, and all of a sudden she's moving with animations. So
we have a couple in particular that we have mapped out if you want specifics.
This is a Tomism, really. I mean, I'm kind of stealing his thunder because he'd probably tell you this if I didn't tell you this. But just getting her to move in some small form is easy to check off. So how many animations? Of what quality, what duration, that kind of jazz. Otherwise, it's too easy to check the milestone off without having done the meat of what we would really hope for you to have.
Just to get her in a recorded way, we have 4. We want her to idle, we want her to walk, and we want her to be able to pick up and put down objects. Those are kind of the 4 most important things that she can do.
Okay.
So those are the 4.
4 fully mocapped, sizable animations.
Yeah.
Great. That's adding that specificity. That's easier for you to judge yourselves by and for us to judge you by. So there you go, Tom. You don't have to give that now. The pipe tool was amazing, amazing, amazing. The plant expansion tool was amazing. The little things like crawling all over the place. And so it's just intelligently figuring out where to go based on the mesh itself?
You'd have to ask Jacob for specifics on that one.
Specifics, currently it's given a forward vector, and that can just be determined by anything that's going on in the world. Currently, for that example, it was random, but you can plug whatever numbers you want.
Different mesh in there to crawl over that other mesh?
Yeah, one idea was to connect it with the material tag system, so you can have some materials that the plant's more excited to grow on and some that it wants to avoid. Yeah.
Okay. So you guys got like Tony Stark tag, so I'll see about them. The wet conveyance on plans is maybe not obvious enough, and that's hard.
Oh, I did forget. That's a first pass on that one. We're gonna pass on it again.
Okay, good. And then I was gonna say, why is it more the artwork integrated in the game? But then you showed that last step at the end, and you showed me that it was. So never mind. I'm glad that you had that going on. I will say there's a lot of asset pack usage, so that's a blessing and a curse. It's always a pro-con situation. So just weigh that out. I mean, just be careful. I might suggest that maybe there are certain rooms, maybe just like a couple rooms, that are perhaps 100% yours, so that let's say an artist is in an interview and they can show that one room and say, yeah, everything in that room is made by me, instead of constantly having to qualify like, oh, 70% of what you see is what I did. It's just annoying when you have to do that on your portfolio.
Yeah.
So maybe give your artist a couple places that are like 100% theirs. That'll help with the asset pack pro-con situation. But those are all my notes. I'm very impressed by how much of the game you're making, how much of progress you've made along the way. I think I gave you several things to think about. But I'm impressed by the game itself and how you've come.
Thank you.
All right.
Hi, Tom.
421. 21. Not much time for comments.
Well, by my count, they spent 30 minutes in presentations.
Right.
All right.
Time and questions.
You go first next time.
Okay. So great. Really impressive, I would say, is my number one thing. Totally awesome. I'm surprised by how much you have. Your last area definitely put it to where it went from just a good-looking first shot at the artwork that would have been fine to, okay, cool, you've got like a totally different style there that's also awesome, I think. So great job there. I thought your explanation about the paper prototype was very effective and convinced me that you had done the background research to make a fun game, which is great. Let's see if I have any criticism. I mean, you're obviously well equipped to be making this game, and so it's hard to come up with really anything, to be honest. I didn't really get from your initial opening like a sense of the style of play that you're going for. Like, is this like a puzzle game where you're trying to play it over and over and over again and like figure out the different ways that you can solve it? Like encouraging like lots of depth, or is it like you're trying to go through the perfect playthrough? I don't have a sense for the player's experience that you're expecting through the level.
It's a good question. It's one that we've asked ourselves several times, and as is obvious from what's on the screen, constantly we hit up against hard design questions, which we have to just hammer through and find good ways to answer. That one has fallen a little bit behind the other questions because we really wanted to answer the immediacy questions of the room sandbox first. What was our answer on that most recently, Andrew?
Well, what you're getting at, I think, is how does the player know what decisions they make are the correct ones? If they're punished so severely and then they die, is that how they're supposed to figure out their ship, is by kind of running against it until they die?
More like when I play Angry Birds, the gameplay is play it, get 2 stars, play it, get 2 stars. I'm playing the same level over and over and over again, trying to find that perfect way through, and I got it. Okay, next level.
I get more what you're talking about now.
Like perfecting a short game but doing it perfectly, or is it an expansive game where there's 10 different ways to solve it and all of them are equally satisfying?
Definitely that latter one, but not necessarily that they're all satisfying, more that they're all distressing and barely work.
In an ideal session, the player should make it to the finish line, but they should be limping and bloody when they get there. It should be about conserving your resources and desperately trying to save space. And maybe you messed up, and now you have to deal with that. So it's not about messing up and then fixing it next time. It's about making a mistake and then dealing with the consequences as you go forward in this increasingly messy, chaotic environment.
Okay. And in a perfect world, if 10 people play your finished product, what was the average play time?
In a finished version of this,
and they all win.
Let's see.
They all win.
We were aiming for 30 to 40 minutes, ideally.
Yeah.
That was about the time range we had thought about.
It takes around that long to win the game.
Yeah.
And then obviously you can lose quicker and then start over and try and get through it.
Absolutely.
Okay. That's fine. I just want to make sure you were thinking about it.
Yeah.
The asset states worry me a little bit because you're saying, oh, that asset is either it's liquid and now it's ice, and now it's evaporating, and it's like you're basing it on the visuals are going to convey that to the player. Like if it's a puddle, it looks like a puddle. If it's a frozen block of ice, it's a frozen block of ice.
Mm-hmm.
Are there continuous states between those? Like, can I see that a water puddle is 10 or 15 or 20 seconds away from icing over?
I think that calls back to the question that Ron was asking about, like how to see roughly the timing of these transitions and how much impact you're having. I think that's a really good question. I want to have a good answer for you by the end of April when we're looking at the longer term systems. It's a really good question. I think there are various things we can do with UI and visuals to make that really clear, but we'd have to test it out to find the right answers.
Well, it's funny because I was going to use your answer as a segue to what you just said. Because you don't really know
Exactly.
if you need that or not. And the only way to know is to test it. And I would say a criticism of your current plan. Can you bring up your plan?
Yeah. Down two more. This one. Yeah.
Would be you're planning on doing your first testing on this with a focus group in April.
Yes.
Yeah, you've got quite a bit of stuff here with your system running. I would like to understand better your logic there. Not now, because we don't have time to answer the question, but like what are you hoping to get out of that first test, and are you angling your production schedule towards answering those really complicated systems questions during that first April test? Because you guys need a lot of answers about how complicated this is, and whether these digital states that you have on these items is going to be enough or not. Yet it doesn't seem like right now you have enough of the game to really be able to give to somebody and let them, because you're hoping to be able to convey information to the user. So you need to have that conveyance in. That means the graphics and all that are in. So that's why it's going to be delayed, right? But at the same time, you need that information to kind of come back to. So I'm hoping that you're looking at the production, the order in which you're doing things and the dependencies through the lens of a playtest.
So I'll give a really short answer since we don't have time. That's why March is integration month, so that we can get to the point where we can put a product in front of somebody that'll actually make sense to them. And then also, if you go to the focus group testing slide, currently, we have time scheduled in to do that preparation and planning. Because I've been getting ready for this presentation, I haven't done that legwork yet. That was one of the first things I was going to hit in March.
Because I think your game more than any, I'm really worried that you guys are going to need a really interesting tutorial to explain to people the way your systems are connected, and I don't really see that in your planning. And some games can get along with just sort of letting the player play through very low risk situations and teaching them about this.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many details in these systems and interconnected pieces that you don't want your whole game to end up being the tutorial. You need to teach the player how things interact so that they can do that puzzle solving.
Right.
They can puzzle solve intelligently. And again, the only way you're going to be able to understand just how difficult your game is and how difficult your systems are is the human brain connecting the pieces in a logical way is going to be by putting it in front of humans to let them try to connect it and see what they're reading on your graphics and things like that, to be able to then pivot and iterate and do all the things that good game designers do. And
we actually noticed that playtesting with Ron earlier this month, that the room we were testing in was just Hyper-O2 initially. Ron was noticing that was really constraining his choices, which ended up leading to the insight that was a really good way to teach that particular mechanic. So you have a particular room condition. You're told by the ship's systems, by the talking computer that texts you information that this room is Hyper-O2, beware if you set a fire. It'll blow up the entire room, and then you've learned that constraint and how to deal with it. So we are starting to gather that sort of information, and it really clearly does come from playtests.
And certainly another way to approach this would be to have a difficulty level. I can play through on easy, and I'm learning, and then have ramped up difficulty levels. That would be one way to approach this, but even that's going to require a lot of testing.
Yes.
So I think it's a fairly complicated part of this design that you're going to need to get around. Are you going to be able to move any of these emitters around? Because you showed all static emitters.
Yeah, so currently it's built in to what we have that you're capable of moving them around as objects. We were planning to have that as a playtesting question, whether it was more fun to have just static ones on the wall or whether it was more fun to have them move around. We have the architecture easy for both. That's a really good focus group 1 question.
Okay, and when I move around and I'm on fire, am I then heating up a room?
Yes.
Okay, and there is a sense of space, like if something is hot over here is getting hotter than over there in the room?
There is a certain amount of local heat transfer.
Like the room has a temperature, but there's an area of the room that has a temperature?
I think Jacob can probably answer this question best.
Sort of. Fire currently heats up things around it. The room has its own static temperature, which is between super cold and super hot. But if something is on fire, it does heat up the objects around it.
So if you have an object on the other side of the room that's not near fire, its temperature is the temperature of the room?
Yes.
Yes.
And then the room is, so you might have an object that is at 1,000 degrees. That's causing the room to go up slowly and cause the other objects to heat up slowly.
Yes.
And if I'm near the fire, I'm 1,000 degrees. If I'm not, I'm 500?
Yes.
So there's not a 750? Anything at 750?
Not currently, no.
Okay. And are you planning on having that intermediate, like how far I am from the fire, or whatever?
I don't believe so. I think that's another playtest question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
If it seems useful and fun,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's all I got. Good job.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Take a All right. Hello, I'm Diana Benicilia, and I'm the project lead for Suspicious Box. This is Nick. He's one of our level designers. So I'm going to show you our game Luminol coming out summer 2018. Okay, so before we jump into our demo, I just want to give you a quick summary of what our game is about. Luminol is a game where you go through doors that might not lead to an environment that you would think it would lead to. So it's like Monsters, Inc. in a way. It's also similar to Portal, but orientations can change, so you can walk on walls. So for instance, here where you go through this door, you can exit out onto the wall. We also don't want our game to be linear, but we want it to be explored and discovered. So we want to also take inspiration from Monument Valley. So let's go ahead and get into studying our core game mechanics. Okay. So in this first scene, we're going to show you how doors in our scene works. So let's look around. We see 2 green doors, 2 blue doors, and 1 purple door. The purple one is where we need to exit from, so we can probably see that these doors that match in color correlate with each other. So this is indeed true when we opened it, because we can see that the orange wall to our right now becomes our new floor when we exit from above. Okay, so we are looking around, and we see the purple door there again. In order to get to it, we need to go through these matching blue doors. Okay, so let's exit the scene. Okay, so we just taught you our first mechanic, how doors work. So now we're going to teach you how knobs work. So here we have a yellow knob, a yellow door, a red knob, and a red door. So these probably, the colors of the knobs probably correlate with the colors of the door. So let's see if this is true by taking the yellow knob and seeing if it creates a yellow door. And yes, it does. But we can't exit, so we need to go back and try out the red knob. You can also see here that we have an inventory system going on. All right, so now we can exit, so let's go ahead and drop the knob. Okay, so we just taught you how knobs work. So now we want to teach you how gravity cubes work. Okay, so you can see cubes here that have arrows that point in the direction that their gravity is in. So this one that we just picked up has a downward gravity, and you can see these ones on the wall point left, so they have a leftward gravity. And that is indeed true. So now let's progress. And we can see that the cubes have a gravity relative to you no matter where you are. So here we are taking the cubes and using them as platforms. Okay, so that's enough of the review for the mechanics. So now let's get into the gameplay demo. Okay, so welcome to the area that we just previewed, and this is what we're going to be calling the alleyway. Note when we look around this space how, even though it is outdoors and very vertical, it mimics the feeling of claustrophobia that you feel inside of an interior space. So since last presentation, we have created an atmospheric world shader that we chose to do according to the Firewatch style. So we studied Firewatch and asked how objects in the distance flatten. And this depth perception we've done by stacking different color and opacities of fogs over one another. And we've decided to make these fogs complementary colors, so blues and purples. And also blurs areas that aren't lit. So let's progress down this. Okay, so I see something that's highlighted on the right. So this is a door. So let's open and see where this leads us to. Okay, so this calls back on the tutorial that teaches you how doors work. So let's go straight through this. So now our main character it only has a walking cycle right now, but we found out that this is exactly how Shelf and Portal animated as well. So it's an accidental homage to one of our biggest inspirations. So let's move ahead forward. And you can see that landmarks contrast with warm colors. This ramen kitchen to the left has a contrasting red light and fog. We also see other warm colors around the scene with these neon door frames that we've made that are also interactable. So let's look around the scene and see what we have available to us. So this door does not have a knob on it, so if we remember in the tutorial, we'll probably get one later. So if we also look at this frame in the distance, that's also one of those reveal frames. So let's just go through the one door that is available to us. And now we are in the ramen kitchen. You can see when looking around the space that is just a white boxed area. And this is just items that artists built to get a feeling of what goes where. And you can also see when looking around that the room kind of mimics what the tutorial rooms feel like and have doors oriented in different angles. So you can also see that there's a knob rotating over there. So probably the goal of this whole room is to get that knob. So let's try and do that. Okay, you can see yourself. Let's go straight ahead. All right, so we're about to pass through a non-traditional vertical door. So this is a square door that does not open like a regular door should. Okay. All right, so holy crap, we are now on the side of our alleyway wall. So looking at the world through different perspectives has really given us a lot of creativity when artists and level designers work with each other during set dressing. So coming at the environment through different angles makes it almost a distinct new space. So if you notice over there, that is where our level started. And we can realize when we look down below that the red light of the ramen bar still attracts our eye because it is a landmark. And also note how this is really weird because the rain is now sideways. Okay, so now before we head into this, we're going to see that there's going to be a flicker. And this flicker we are aware of, and we're currently in the process of fixing because this is happening because when we're falling through a door vertically, the camera is colliding with a mesh, and we already have fixed this when going through a door regularly, horizontally, so we just have to apply it when falling through vertically. Okay. So now you can see that, as we saw in the tutorial, that you can pick up knobs and cubes. Because we're working on this inventory system, we're also keeping in mind that we want to keep the model still retaining its 3D perspective, so we won't be replacing it with any 2D UI. Okay, so this is exciting. We have our first doorknob, so we just have to find a frame to attach it to, probably that one in the alley. Okay, so before we go into this frame, let's explore this area back here a little bit. So we want to show you more gameplay in our world, so beyond this point, expect a lot of white boxed and unfinalized art. Let's see this door frame on the side. It is green, so that door frame that that knob that we attached to this door also turned green, and that's because they correlate, just like in the tutorial. So let's go through. All right, so now we are on a fence. The world is very vertical right now. I don't see a door to go through, so let's just explore the space. Okay, so I see that square door down there below, so we just have to fall. Okay. But before we go through it, let's just look around the area. Okay, so there's a doorknob over there, so we obviously have to get on that wall. So let's try to go through this square door. And note how square doors, unlike rectangular doors, you can come in at any orientation that you are in. So also note that right now we are on the ceiling of what was the ramen kitchen. And we know that we're on the ceiling because the pans would be hanging if we came in here regularly, as well as those bananas. So let's pick up this suspicious box. Okay. Now that we've picked up the knob, we can go through this garbage can that we made and do a little dumpster dive. Okay, so I'm going to stop you right here because we are aware that we have a frames per second drop happening on the screen, and this is because every single time that a door is open, it is re-rendering that scene. So currently right now we have 3 doors open, which means the scene is being re-rendered 3 times. So this we're looking already into actively finding solutions like culling and fading, and also just the camera concentrating, rendering the one door that is looking into. All right. So one of the goals in our game is to allow the player to creatively explore the space. To that end, to get to our next puzzle, let's see where that is. We're going to show you one of the many orientations that you can use to arrive there. Oh, we missed. All right. So now we are in the cube tutorial. Okay.
Reset it by mistake.
So now, we're in the cube area. If you recall back in the tutorial, we can use these cubes as platforms. So we're going to go ahead and do that and jump on this cube in order to get that knob. All right, so we're going to use these platforms, and remember that the cube's gravity stays relative to you. So that gravity is pointing leftward, so we need it to point right. There we go. All right.
It's not to the. It's got
All right. So for those that saw our January presentation, you'll remember that we started in the skyscraper scene that was super white boxed at that point. But now that we've arrived here, our gameplay demo is going to come to a close. But we still want to show you a few last assets.
Ooh.
What's happening?
Teleported me there.
All right. Okay, so we started modeling one of our core game mechanics, which is this laser turret. We have not yet implemented puzzles into it, but we just wanted to show what it looks like in Engine. And so that was with the models and the visual effects that we're working on. But this is also a player character model that we're making because we do see ourselves through doors. It's not projecting on the screen. Okay, good. Okay. So last time, our main player character started as a concept image and a base model, but now we do have a rig for him. So we wanted to make her a bipedal robotic character where the legs kind of have attributes of a quadrupedal. Currently, we have a few base animations like this walk, run, idle, and jump. But also one thing that we wanted to do is make sure that we really had a good color scheme where the main character would stand out in any lighting in the scene. So we have red lighting, we have blue lighting, we have purple lighting. So we just really made sure that she stood out by taking concept images and the 3D base model and testing this out in Engine. So this is the model, almost complete. We just have to add in some tertiary and minor paneling, but we also have emissives on the model to help in case we are in a dark scene. Back in January, we also had the laser turret, as you saw in the demo, just the concept image and also the base model. But now it is at this state. The visual effects that you saw are work in progress and will be finalized by the end of March, and we want the laser beam to have a kind of rotating double helix look. Okay, so let's remember that we ended the demo in the skyscraper scene, and January we had it super white box, as I said, and this is where it lies now in the current state. We are starting to build it with custom assets for this area, and we are populating the skyscraper white box with a building generator that helps us create buildings in a low poly limit. This is important because there are so many buildings in the scene that we just don't want to overtax the system. And we're also using a pipe spline generator that we made to help flesh out multiple levels. You also saw that back in January that we were working on a door. So this is that current door in this state. And we're creating these special doors to lead to special places. So this is the state that it's in right now. We're also creating neon door frames with different shapes and colors. In March, we also want to start creating unique custom neon signs around the environment. Okay, so in order to talk about the rest of our current art, we need to discuss the scope and the scale of this game. So the game begins, and you start on a train. Through the windows, you can see a cathedral colossus in the distance, and in order to defeat it, you have to get inside. You'll get off the train and get into an alleyway where eventually you'll walk into the ramen kitchen. Here, you learn what perspective changes are. You eventually find yourself back onto the central alleyway, and you eventually walk into a tunnel where you learn how gravity cubes work. You then find your way back into the skyscraper scene where you learn how laser turrets work. And then you find yourself in the final scene inside of the Cathedral Colossus trying to defeat it. In order to defeat it, you have to call back on every mechanic that you've learned so far. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, so we started building the puzzles for the Cathedral Colossus area. Our idea for this area is to mix a lot of traditional cathedral assets like stained glass and columns with interactive industrial items like conveyor belts and generators. So as you saw in our demo, I briefly skimmed over our iterative process, and I just want to say that we're starting to document this, as you can see on the right. So on the left, you see that we start this iterative process with ideas and concepts, and then we start to white box where the puzzles and the general area is. The next step we make is that artists make white box simple items to study shape language and see where things go. So that kind of state you saw in the demo inside of the ramen shop. So once approved, the artist can finally move to making the actual final art assets. So this is just really helps with the art creation and time management. So this whole process we're doing for all the levels. So far we've concentrated on making a small number of portfolio pieces, like what is also needed along the way. But one thing we're excited about is that we're going to take the ramen shop and the cathedral, the two main rooms, and make them entirely custom spaces for these two environments. So we've also found out how to integrate our substance designs into Unreal to also dynamically tile and change. So you can see on the left that we've already started with the substance for the cathedral stone rose glass. So that will be fully designed by the end of March, as well as on a 3D object. We've also created rooftop tiles and other wall and floor tiles. So we are currently working with a professional sound designer from Berkeley, and with his music as well as the shader and the lighting, we can create this mysterious mood that we're really going for, that has led to us through inspirations like the movie Blade Runner and games like The Last Night. So currently we have 3 songs. The song that you heard at the very beginning is Soundtrack 2, which is quieter and we felt is more appropriate for the alleyway. The musician has created all the songs in a way that they can blend seamlessly from one song to another because it deviates off of one simple shared melody and a unified BPM. So now I want to talk about production. You can see here on the left that we have a chart that shows the hours that we put into the project so far, split amongst meetings and the different tracks. And then on the right, we have hours that we've yet to put into the project. This can be reflected in the next, this next slide on the bar across the top. This shows the hours used and what hours we have remaining for our time resources. And we've also split it up amongst the 5 different environments so that you can see the state of completion that they're in. So one of our goals in February was to make this roadmap where we split amongst each different track and each person to kind of get an idea of where our goals and our milestones are. So you can see this reflected here just as a quick summary. And the blue things are the things that are really important to us. One of the main things that was very important for our whole team was that we launched to Steam. So this paperwork we're going to start in May. And we want to lock everything by June and July so that we can start finalizing and doing bug fixing. Another thing is that we do understand that our game has a complex mechanic that is not linear, so this makes it really risky for us. And we also understand that good designers come up with clever ideas, but we're better when we listen to our players. So even though we've had classmates give us their opinions, the problem is that they know what this game is about, so we really need a new set of eyes that have never seen this game before. And we also want to play test because we're building this community, which is reflected in our Facebook and our Twitter that we started last month. So far we have 225 followers. And in the last 28 days, we have reached 2,500 views. It is also important for us to get reactions and feedback along this whole process. But there's one more thing. We have a low poly asset right now that is developing into a higher poly asset, and it's that our suspicious artist, Israel, is having a suspicious baby. Yeah. So we should turn on the light?
What?
Light?
Turn on the light.
Yeah. All right. Yep.
You want to go first? Sure.
I can talk wherever you want. It's easy because I like that. I like feedback like this. I draw little hearts next to the things that I say I love. So
Okay.
So that's good. So I got a lot of hearts, so that's really good. And in no particular order, you guys really buttoned up a lot of stuff. I always admire the teams that take the time to make everything about their project fit together. So, like, you know, I looked at your PowerPoint, the styling of your PowerPoint, which is so perfectly styled to match the style of the game, and I absolutely love that. You know, it's just sort of big picture thinking. It's what professionals do. So you guys, you know, those details matter, and you guys did a great job with it. I can see that carrying over to what you do with your campaign to go online. I think that's it's the right way to think about it. I thought you had a great tactic in the middle of the presentation where you showed here's the white box that we had last month, and then the exact same angle, only styled up. I love to see that because it makes it really easy to see progress. So that was really well done. I really love this idea of this sort of machinized cathedral. You know, I get a kick out of those abstractions of mixing like religion and technology and stuff. And so I just think that's really rich with a lot of possibilities for your environment. So that was really nice to see. I also really love the fact that you guys didn't treat your art style guide as a document that you throw away. You know, you referred back to it a couple times during the presentation. You know, specifically mentioned you know, how you're referring back to your shape language, so you haven't forgotten what you did. That wasn't a waste of time, so it's really great to see that. I really like what you're doing with this sort of layered coloring for the environment. There's a lot of thought that went into that, and it does make the whole environment very readable. So there's a lot of good stuff in there for that. It occurred to me, I also like the idea of the colorless doors and the square doors that kind of treat your orientation and your gravity separately. So a lot of good thinking, you know, iteration and evolution in the mechanic, which I like to see. A couple things. I don't have any complaints, so just a couple of little things. I think, you also answered one of my questions. I wrote it down and then you answered it in the middle. I was going to ask about sort of the idea of conveyance for the doors, and you had that nice symbology outlines for the doors, so it's good anticipating one of my questions and but I love to see that. I think as I was watching it, of course Nick kind of flies through that, and it's like, I feel like, I'm I think though that it will be a really interesting challenge to kind of get players used to kind of those really rapid orientation changes, and especially when I'm looking at these gravity cubes, and I saw how like you kind of were using them to kind of make these steps in the air and stuff, like but because of the way that they're oriented differently, you have to go through multiple doors because it maintains its direction, which is really neat, and it's going to be a really interesting challenge UI and tutorial-wise. And I think there's sort of several things in here that are going to be very challenging. Not that you can't do it, but they're going to be very challenging. But that's actually the thing that will make me really want to watch as you guys prepare for Steam. Because you've got this very ambitious goal of getting out on Steam like in August, I guess. And I think the biggest challenge for Steam, I have no doubts that you can finish your game in time for Steam, but the tutorial is going to be really important because this is going to be very visually confusing, very visually disorienting. There's a lot of mechanics that are simple, but they kind of build together building block style to become more and more complex. And kind of training your players will be a really interesting challenge. I think you're going to have to start some sort of parallel development with your tutorial really early. You probably want to take advantage of your focus group tests, especially to deal with tutorial, because that's going to be a big challenge. You did mention a couple things about some of the things that your artists were working on. It's a little bit spread out, so it's kind of a little bit hard for me to get a good grasp on sort of the totality of what the artists have been working on since last month. Can you give me a little bit of an overview of like art-wise, what have you guys done? I see there's a lot of asset use, that's fine, but I want to get you're going to have 2 locations that you're going to do, but what have we done so far art-wise?
So we have done, the main character is almost to completion. It has its rig ready, and we're working on animations for it. So then we also have the laser turret that has the high poly, and we're working on visual effects for that. We have the substance designs. We also have the buildings, the building generator that's building our buildings, as well as the pipe spline that we made. Is there anything that I forgot? Oh, yes, the door frames. So we have the multiple neon door frame signage, and we also have that one special door as well.
Okay.
As well as white box, white box assets.
You mentioned that sort of the use of the how you do the color treatments of the environment going into depth and stuff like that. Is that also sort of a tech artist work, or is that where do we get that from?
The atmospheric world shader? Yeah, so we made that, our tech artist made it.
Okay, is there any other stuff that your tech artist did? I'm just trying to get a big picture.
She's also doing the laser effects, so she's did those 2, like the one coming out of the laser and how it reacts in the end. Yeah, I think that should be it, right? Oh yeah, the door reveal.
Oh yeah, when
Yeah.
Yeah, that should be fun.
Because if you remember, back in January, we wanted to do like a kind of transparent pixelated shader, so we tried to do that, but it just didn't work out, so we had to switch our plan.
Yeah, that's the fun part of making games, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to comment that this render problem you have, where you open multiple doors simultaneously, and it starts eating up your frame rate. This is really cool. I wouldn't have expected that, but I kind of wanted to mention it. It's like, oh, I can see how that could be a potential problem. That's one of those things you can't possibly anticipate. It'll be interesting I'd love to hear when you solve that problem. Even though it might be a little bit out of scope, if we can't put it in the next presentation, somebody needs to come and tell me just because I'm interested in that stuff. It's going to be a new challenge. Also, just one last thing. This is mostly kudos and stuff. Who made your data visualization for your production slides?
That would be a combination of Israel, Raphael, and Stone, and Guillaume. Yeah.
So, yeah, you guys clearly know like the right button to push with me. That's just fabulous. I know we're doing that kind of digital. So you had to know I would see that, and I'm the only weird production wonk that would get a giant kick out of that. But there's a good example of know your audience, because I just saw that, a little heart drew itself in front of my eyes. So, gosh, I'm kind of like Tom when he was talking about the previous project. It's sort of hard to find stuff to pick on. So it's mostly just a bunch of little hearts on my notes. So really super job. I'm totally looking forward to the next subject.
All right. So visually stunning. Right off the bat, I just felt amazed by what I was seeing. And when I watched Blade Runner, I always want Chinese food. The same sensation when I saw that little ramen place.
Yeah.
So now you know what I'm eating for dinner, and so every time you present, I'm gonna eat Chinese food. So thanks for inhibiting my health. No, it looks awesome. If I want food that represents the area that you're the visually featured one. Almost a simple enough tutorial. I think we forget how easy tutorials need to be. There was just even just the notion of going through a door. No, that sounds stupid. Because you're like, oh, well, our whole game is about going through doors and then being on another, being in another orientation. Yeah, but players don't even know yet that they're supposed to go up to the door and press a certain button. Like that's where they are when they start the game. So even just give us that, just a simple like here's a door. Like think in terms of trying to do this with a 3-year-old.
Okay.
I will say that we have an area planned right before this that will probably teach that moment.
Great. So that I wasn't seeing the actual first one. Great. Because you just have to go so slow. The knobs are brilliant. Really brilliant. I love the knobs. And I love the fact that they could look different with the defensive doors and all that kind of stuff. That's very fun. Also, the inventory system seemed a little swapped. It looked like the one that was...
Yeah, you can toggle between things. So we have it right now where you can toggle 4.
Right, but the one that seemed to be selected actively was
in the front.
The one that I thought it was active, right?
That's not, the inventory system's not final right now, but the one that's right in the center is the selected one, and you can switch between them with button presses.
I guess it's because the other one that was farther back looked like it was closer to the door I wanted to use.
Yeah, probably.
So my brain's like, oh, I'm going to use that knob on the door because that's the one that's closest to the door. But you were thinking more in terms of, no, it's the center one that's closer to me, not the door.
Right,
so
okay.
I feel like a lot of people might have that mentality. If not, ignore what I said. But play test that because it seems like that could be confusing. The arrows in the boxes are really clever, and I love the fact that that means that you can now make boxes that look like more normal boxes. Because we're used to seeing arrows in boxes, ironically, this side up and yours is this side down. But I think it'll make it easier for you to not have to have those boxes look so so much like sore thumbs because the arrow can be on the box. We're used to seeing arrows on boxes, so I like that. Your hot swapping skills, Nick, are premier. You alt tabs between like PowerPoint and like Unreal and 7 other programs all at the same time. And it's like wow, because you guys went in and back out again, in and out of Unreal. Diana was able to like just come in and out of Unreal and back to PowerPoint 50 times because that when you're running every demo I ever do. That was so awesome. Tell them how many hotkeys you used.
Oh, for the game? No, there's a bunch because there's one to reset. If I missed a jump, there's one to reset. There's
He's
like
basically used
10,
all the keys. All the keys.
So that was the presentation on Planet and how you set up tools and debugging.
Yeah, I set up a lot of stuff to be able to make it like this smooth.
That was so teach a class on that. Really great clarity, Diana, and the presentation was very, very well prepared. I mean, you guys had every beat like blocked out. It's almost like Tom hammered you several times to rehearse your presentation over and over again. It was so well prepared. So I really, really love that. One of the dangers of being so well prepared, though, is that there were moments where it felt like you were literally reading off a script. And
all right, yeah.
There are oratory tricks in reading from a script and then not feeling like you really are. So I encourage you to think in those terms. And even if it means that your notes need to be a little bit less perfectly wrought so that you'll know exactly what to say, but maybe not precisely
okay.
what words to use, Find that happy medium there so that we get that tone that you're still right here and that you're not just reading from a prompter. Is this a real world that people live in?
No.
Okay. Okay, that's important.
Okay.
That's important because that affects a lot of the decisions that you make artistically. I love the dumpster dive. And it's a weird idea to have like trash and certain kinds of clutter in a world that doesn't actually have people. And so you can make an artistic choice to still want to do that, but then it does kind of create a friction with the fact that, well, no, there aren't actually people in this environment. So I want you to be careful with that, because you might shave off some of that, realizing that this is more of a surrealistic world, a representational world, or a dreamlike world, or an abstract world. That's not a real world. So then that might curb some of the real world things you decide to put in or not put in. Like you might not put in a toilet in a surrealistic world, because no one goes to the bathroom with you, right? So you think about those things, because I think you're really walking that line where your art is so good that it looks real, but then it's like, well, but it's not real. And so if you're trying to create that consternation in me, you're succeeding, but that's risky, right? I think it's easier to choose one or the other. And I kind of like that you're brave enough to play with the conundrum of that space between, but I think you can that can go awry. So just be careful with that riskiness. Great quote about the environment, creating different angles, which feels like a new space. That's like almost your mantra. It was very self-introspective that your team views the game that way. I think this is a very accurate way to view the game. I love the sideways rain. Oh, and it feels like there are, you absolutely want to play that trick where steam goes sideways and other things disobey gravity, particle effects, things like that. Because it's just so fun to see that really exacerbate the fact that I'm standing on the side of the wall, right? The square doors, they preserve orientation.
So the square doors, when they're rectangular, you can't fit through them in sideways, like when you're walking on walls. If they're rectangular, but if they're square, you can fit on them in any rotation.
Okay, I think that starts to get confusing. So you're saying that whenever I go through any portal, be it a square door or a rectangular door, my orientation still is going to change. Is that true? Or not?
Yes, they change depending on the two doors.
Okay, my orientation always changes. But you're saying that square ones can be entered even when I'm at a disoriented angle versus rectangular ones can only be entered when I have the proper orientation.
Yes, so mathematically speaking, you would be only able to enter a rectangular door in 3 angles, whereas a square door in all 6.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Then make them windows. I think that'll give you the conveyance that you're looking for. Because it was just confusing to know, I can go through that one, but not that one. Why? And so I love that later on you showed a bunch of cool conveyance ideas about making doors look different. Either do that or make the square ones windows. And I just know that, I can enter a window sideways but not a door. Got it. Just something to make it faster and clearer, more intuitive. Now we're using the dumpster driver. That is an amazing looking laser turret. Why laser turrets specifically?
Okay, so if we go back to, I'm just gonna show you like the level layout that we're in. Okay, so we're kind of playing off of like light reflecting off of a mirror, so that's what we're gonna do, where you can angle the laser turret at different angles throughout the whole cityscape. We just haven't like created the puzzles around it, but that's the general idea that we have in mind.
Okay, that's a good justification for laser turrets specifically. The reason why I bring it up is because it does feel like a touch of a sore thumb in your surrealistic world. It felt a little odd. And I love that you're including it mechanically, because I can totally see shades of the little laser turrets in Portal, and I love all the tricks you can do with that, and the puzzles that will come our way. I'm excited to play those puzzles. But the laser turret itself artistically felt a bit inconsistent, and thematically felt a little bit inconsistent with this world. So whether it's through art or maybe it's justified thematically as something else, think about that, because it just kind of struck me when I saw it. Like, oh, what's that doing here? I had that feeling. And it's unfortunate because I want him in the game too. And I love the fact that you're going to play all these reflective tricks. That's awesome. But it did give me that feeling, that dissonance. What is a cathedral colossus?
So that's what we have in our story right now, is that it's kind of just a big ominous like kind of monster, but we had in mind Howl's Moving Castle, like where it has like different building structures on it, and it kind of acts like that monster as well. So it's like architectural as well. So we just decided to do that. We just knew that we wanted like an ominous thing in the environment. So. Oh yeah.
So it's like a boss that's a building?
Right.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I went around. Very complicated.
I just wanted to know what it was. Okay, congrats on aiming at Steam. That's awesome. I'm inspired by you aiming at Steam, and I think this could absolutely be a darling on Steam. August is really fast and soon. Fortunately, Tom's good at going through the laundry list of things that you'll need to do to really be ready for Steam, but don't underestimate that, because finally your game is there. And then finally, yeah, just great work on the music and the social media and making suspicious days.
Thanks, guys.
Good job.
Thanks, you too.